And we're back with some more of the mystery book. Last time we left off on talking about the monopoly between big business and big government. We got through the first portion of chapter 3. So now let's continue onwards. I will read a little bit of this last part here and then, I think it's important to understand that technocracy can't accurately be called communism or democracy. It is best understood as a monopoly on power held jointly by big business and big government. And in all honesty, while big government may hold the club, the real power lies with the financial strength of big business. The robber barons of old, like the Rockefellers, weren't interested in a vibrant free market. They didn't like unions, and their perfect world was the company town where the residents owned little and were dependent on the company for practically everything, like Walmart, Amazon, so on and so on. The robber barons were interested in a closed market, a monopoly, or what might look to the public like relatively few players, when in truth, the same group of powerful individuals controlled all the various entities, or at least had a hold or a stock share in it. Wood continued with his explanation of the formation of the Trilateral Commission, the role of President Jimmy Carter, the participation of the United Nations, and the rise of China as an experimental laboratory for this technocratic ideal. So now we're going to go back to parts of Wood's book. The two of them, Rockefeller and Brzezinski, founded the Trilateral Commission, this new international economic order, then immediately passed the baton to the United Nations. In 1974, the United Nations passed a resolution called the Establishment of a New International Economic Order, with their language, and that's where it was introduced to the United Nations. From 1973 on, many things happened, specifically with China. In 1976, when Jimmy Carter was elected and when Zbigniew Brzezinski became his national security advisor, and both Carter and his vice president, Walter Mondale, were members of the Trilateral Commission. Brzezinski is the one who is credited with bringing Deng Xiaoping to the United States to wine and dine him and bring him back into the global economic fold. This is widely acknowledged in textbooks that Brzezinski was the brains behind the introduction of China to the world stage. Henry Kissinger also had a big hand in that. Kissinger was also a founding member of the Trilateral Commission. According to Wood, the members of the Trilateral Commission had sufficient contacts among the foreign policy elite that they could reasonably expect to be placed in the top positions in government, regardless of whether there was a Republican or a Democratic administration in power. President Nixon, a Republican, had Henry Kissinger as his national security advisor, and Democrat Jimmy Carter had Zbigniew Brzezinski as his national security advisor and confidant. The technocrats finally reached the center of American power in the 1970s, after more than 40 years of effort, and could begin putting their plans into action, starting with a test case for their ambitions. Their choice? Not the United States, where they knew they'd run into predictable opposition. Instead, the technocrats chose China, as Wood explained. And now we're going back to the book. China looked like North Korea does today. They had no economic system. There was starvation. They had no industry, and it was horrible. It was a horrible, oppressive culture. However, it was a blank slate to do anything that the Rockefeller crowd wanted done. When Zbigniew Brzezinski got a hold of Deng Xiaoping, Brzezinski did not teach China about free market economics or capitalism. Instead, he taught them about technocracy. That's one reason the ascendance of China has been so dramatic. They have excelled at using that, exploiting it, expanding it, and exporting it to the world. China is the poster child for technocracy. They have perfected surveillance, artificial intelligence, the use of social credit scores to keep their citizens in line, and strong-arming the population, forcing them to do whatever they want. If they don't comply willingly, they just start shooting them. That is basically the story of China and how it came to be where it is today. And now some analysis. Wood's presentation of the history was so succinct. Pardon if I don't even know if I'm saying that word right, but anyway, succinct. Okay. And provided me with such a different lens with which to view the rise of China, it was momentarily disorienting. Had such a close relationship existed between the Chinese Communist Party and the technocrats since the 1970s? Was a significant part of our foreign policy establishment working with the Chinese Communist Party since the late 1970s? However, a publicly available text of the first exchange between Zbigniew Brzezinski and Deng Xiaoping on May 21st, 1978, currently exists on the website of the U.S.-China Institute. It seems that Brzezinski was so interested in normalizing the relationship with China that he didn't mind selling out the people of Taiwan or concealing what he was doing from the American public. And now let's see. Brzezinski. I think this is what Brzezinski says. Yeah, this is a part where it says Brzezinski and then. Okay. With respect to discussions about normalization, which we trust will begin in June, I would like to suggest that these discussions be kept confidential and that no advance publicity be issued. I think continuing such discussions in the context of confidentiality would make their success more likely and would minimize some of the political complications which at one point or another will be inevitable in our own country. Although my visit here is not to negotiate normalization, I would like to think of it as contributing a step forward and not a step backward. We only want to go forward, and I hope you will interpret this visit in such a fashion. Yeah, this is what Brzezinski said. We start with the premise, which we have already accepted before, that there is only one China, not 1.5 Chinas or 2 Chinas or China and Taiwan. For us, there is only one China. We also believe that the 3 key points provide the framework for defining our basic relationship. There are certain basic difficulties that we ourselves have to overcome, but though these difficulties are for us to overcome precisely because there is a relationship between us, you have to be aware of these difficulties and be sensitive to them. The fundamental difficulty is how will the American people understand the nature of this historically transitional period in our relations with the people of Taiwan following normalization. During that historically transitional period, domestic difficulties in the U.S. would be far minimized if our hope and expectation that the internal and purely domestic resolution of Chinese problems would be such that it would be peaceful and that our own hopes in this respect would not be specifically contradicted. End quote. One doesn't need to be a diplomat. So this is now back to analyzing. One doesn't need to be a diplomat to understand when you're being betrayed. Brzezinski was clearly throwing Taiwan overboard in favor of China, and in return, Brzezinski seemed to be begging the Chinese not to do anything that would unduly alarm the wary American public. It seems both sides understood the bargain they were making. As one reads the account, It's difficult to escape the feeling that Brzezinski was acting like the diplomat of a subservient nation, while China was being treated as the dominant nation, perhaps even the victor in a great war. Brzezinski remained a friend to the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party all of his life, and when he died in June 2017, was remembered fondly in the pages of China Daily in an opinion piece titled "Brzezinski and His Insightful Wisdom Will Be Missed." Here's a sample of what they wrote. The passing of Zbigniew Brzezinski last week came as a shock because a little more than a month ago he was still making public appearances and commenting on the Korean Peninsula issue. In the past week, many of my Chinese journalist friends who had interviewed him or attended his lectures recalled on WeChat moments, their fond memories of the great strategist. For many of us, Brzezinski was a man of wisdom with a great understanding of the world and China. As the U.S. National Security Advisor in the Jimmy Carter administration, Brzezinski played a key role in the normalization of diplomatic relations between the United States and the People's Republic of China in 1979. To my generation, Brzezinski was one of several wise U.S. politicians known to Chinese. Others included former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and former U.S. National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft. Now back to analyzation. When you're eulogized by the Chinese Communist Party, I question when you reach the pearly gates if you're going to get a good reception from St. Peter. I don't think you're going to the good place with fluffy clouds and angels playing music. More likely, you're going to spend eternity in a much warmer climate. Wood continued with the history of how the technocrats, once established in government, figured out how to remain in powerful positions. So this is going back to the book. The early members of the Trilateral Commission told us repeatedly that they were not interested in a political takeover. And yet, during the Carter administration, Carter and Mondale were members. Brzezinski was a member, and at one point, every cabinet member Carter had, except for one, was a member of the Trilateral Commission. It looked like a clean sweep. Then, on the other hand, they say they're not interested in a political takeover. They just wanted to create a new international economic order. But what we found out was that America represented the policy-generating strongman of global economics, and anybody who could get their hands on the engine of economics would be able to control the entire planet. And that's exactly what they did as time went onwards from 1976. The narrative, now this is back to analysis, the narrative of Patrick Wood conforms to the known facts about the early Trilateral Commission and China's entry into the global economic community. These were not low-level government employees. They were the top officials in our government, and they were enacting plans they'd never discussed among the American public. However, they had to work slowly, as they did not have the support of the voters for many of these initiatives. They would need to be present in every presidential administration going forward, as Wood detailed the various administrations. I think it goes back to the book now. These technocrats have represented left and right, liberal and conservative. The political labels mean nothing to them. They operated through the Reagan administration. George H.W. Bush was a member of the Trilateral Commission. Then you had Bill Clinton and Al Gore, both of whom were members of the Trilateral Commission. They brought into their government many members of the Trilateral Commission. Then with George W. Bush, you had Dick Cheney, who was a powerful member of the Trilateral Commission. Then you had Obama, who was completely surrounded in his intelligence community by members of the Trilateral Commission, completely surrounded. The same thing happened, maybe to a lesser extent, in the Trump administration. And now you have the Biden administration. And back to analysis. In the interview, Wood went on to tell a curious story about Henry Kissinger simply showing up at the White House and having at least 2 unscheduled meetings with President Trump. This is highly irregular, as meetings are supposed to be scheduled and on the daily agenda, and yet it testifies to Kissinger's continuing influence more than 40 years after he left the White House. Despite not being able to set foot in several countries around the world who have designated him a war criminal for his actions during the Vietnam War. In what may or may not have been a coincidence, one of these times was right after Trump had fired FBI Director James Comey, as reported by Chris Cillizza of CNN. Oh, hold on. Okay, so just a little bit more and then we're going to wrap it up. So going back to this story with Henry Kissinger and stuff like that, the White House press pool was called into the Oval Office just before noon Eastern time for what they expected to be a photo op between Trump and the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, since the 2 men were scheduled to huddle earlier today. But it wasn't Lavrov they found sitting with the president. It was Henry Kissinger, best known for his role as Secretary of State to President Nixon. Reporters asked Trump about the firing of FBI Director James Comey. Trump responded briefly that Comey was simply not doing a good job. It was apparently lost on Trump that the last 16 hours have been dominated by comparisons between Nixon's Saturday Night Massacre, where he jettisoned the independent counsel investigating Watergate, and Trump's decision to part ways with Comey. Cillizza of CNN claimed that Kissinger's unexpected appearance was just another example of the Trump circus, a whirlwind of incompetence, just a step or 2 away from disaster. And yet, given what was going on with Trump and the former FBI director, who had just been fired not 24 hours earlier, another interpretation based on the decades of work by Patrick Wood was plausible. Trump was showing his independence by firing FBI Director Comey, and perhaps Kissinger went in to deliver a threat from the globalists. Perhaps. Kissinger may have thought it would be a secret meeting, but Trump turned the situation around by inviting the press in for a photo opportunity. Kissinger, okay, I really got to hurry. All right, so Kissinger, Kissinger, well into his 90s, couldn't quickly scurry away, but instead sat in his chair looking like nothing more than a shriveled little troll as the press arrived. I defy you to look at that picture and come to any other conclusion. And there's a picture in here too. Trump ended his term, maybe just the first. That's a speculation, of course. Obviously, we all know that. As combative as when he entered, although he had not done much to harm the globalists or halt their march to a technocratic state. So we'll end it there, but I do want to show the picture really quick. So this is the picture. There's Henry Kissinger. And it says at the bottom, Henry Kissinger and Donald Trump during Kissinger's unexpected visit to the White House. Official White House photo by Sheila Craighead, assessed on Wikimedia Commons. All right, we'll leave it off there and then we'll pick back up on the next portion here. Ooh, exciting. All right, bye.